Good evening. This is Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with David Frank. And shortly after last week's show was recorded, war broke out in Eastern Europe. As you all know by now, Russia invaded Ukraine. A lot of people dead already, a lot of buildings being blown up as we speak, as there is what appears to be indiscriminate bombing of urban areas. We can get into it if we need to, but we're here to talk about the implications of the war on domestic politics. Really sad to see it happen. We were kind of hoping it wasn't going to happen, but it looks like it was really inevitable. And we'll talk a little bit about how it might have been avoided. I don't know. It definitely. Putin was definitely wanted to expand in Ukraine. He gave a really wild speech where he criticized Lenin for having given up Finland. It really definitely looks like he wants to pass away with his legacy having at least partially restored the glory of old Russia. It's basically make Russia great again. And I don't think he was going to be satisfied with anything short of basically reclaiming control of Ukraine. A lot of people think, well, if only, there had been an agreement that Ukraine never would have been part of NATO, or, no missiles put in. Personally, I don't think that would have been enough. I think he really wants Ukraine back in the Russian circle, at least as a state. Whether or not he wants it to be actually part of Russia, he wants it to be, well, at least what Belarus is right now, which is basically part of Russia. So basically, the attacks are coming from Russia and Belarus. So far. Actually, possibly one major city has been taken, maybe two, but this is going to be a long-term guerrilla insurgency. A lot of deaths on both sides. Close to 1 million refugees have left the country already. Many more probably will. Not sure how many civilian deaths are there. Russia has admitted about as many as 500 of their own deaths. The Ukrainian defense claims more like 5,000 to 6,000. Actually, intelligence people do. Tanks up in flames, planes being shot down by Stinger missiles that have been provided by the West. The Ukraine defense using those javelins and the NLAWs that were a joint project between Sweden and Britain. Tanks may become obsolete. I think that the tanks are being abandoned largely because of these missiles. That is apparently the Ukraine's defense weapons of choice. In the meantime, domestic politics around it. Trump has praised Putin twice. Finally, today, he came out saying that Russia should stop, but it took him a week. After this, he was praising Putin as a genius the whole time. I haven't heard. There were other politicians who seemed to be almost supporting Putin. There was the Fox News figures talking about, well, Putin never called me a racist. I mean, Tucker Carlson. They seem to be backing off that or going quiet. Dave?
Yeah, so this is obviously a heart-wrenching tragedy that's developed since last time we connected. There's so much to the geostrategic what ifs. This confrontation post World War II, Cold War, then in the thaw in '89 with the fall of the Soviet Union, and then there's this this ebb and flow between how the West would treat the new Russia, and there's a whole. We could do hours on that stuff, but yeah. Really the question is, from Putin's perspective, was there a rational, calculated decision based on the true interests of the Russian state to have some members of the Russian Federation surround them, or was it more of a personal, aspiration that comes from what he's given speeches over the years where he said it was one of the worst things in the history of the last century, the fall, and then so people that analyze the Kremlin have all sorts of opinions. So again, there's a lot there. But what you and I talked about, we were going to address today, is sort of the domestic fallout. Yes, everybody that on the news and everybody you talk to and in the West, and there seems to be some coming together. So that's one thing I want to point out, is that Putin had calculated. I believe he miscalculated, because he thought that the alliance was weak and ripe for him to just take advantage of, be an opportunist. But the alliance did pull together. And while there's not an
pulled together sanctions that seemed impossible just as little as a week ago.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and that's huge. And I'm glad you jumped right to the chase, because the United States clearly, President Biden has said, would not send soldiers there, would not send our troops, because of the potential threat of World War III and nuclear annihilation. And that's an escalation that obviously, who could stop that? Who could stop that? So Putin saw the avenue, right? And then so the question is, well, what would, given that we are domestically divided and we were theoretically divided as allies, what was possible? And as you pointed out, some very powerful sanctions, unprecedented sanctions. For example, one of my friends and I were talking. Switzerland is agreeing to just hold money and prevent the top several oligarchs, billionaires, and Putin himself from accessing funds, and the Federal Reserve systems of the world are freezing.
Yeah, when was the last time Switzerland took sides in anything?
Right. Exactly.
Centuries.
Exactly. Yeah, I just said I don't know the number, but but Basel was formed in the year 1000, and the modern not modern, but the banking system sort of began in the 15th century, and so probably forever, Switzerland has been right in the mix of catering to the special interests when it comes to banking secrecy, certainly for as long as the modern banking system. But anyway, one last thing before I hand over to you, is that people are saying that the U.S. I've heard in progressive circles that the United States could have or should have done things differently with respect to signing some degree of peace accord that would solidify or codify our position on Ukraine's NATO membership. And it appears, upon reflection, and I know opinions vary and it's too soon to tell, but it appears that Putin really was relatively unhinged, and this vendetta was almost inevitable, just no matter what. And I know that people would argue about that. But so what are the consequences? We could talk about more later. The bottom line is, I think Biden was very, very transparent about the intelligence and signaling that we do want a path for peace that isn't going to capitulate to Putin, and that is how we got here. I don't think it could have been otherwise.
Yeah, Biden was predicting that the invasion was going to happen. He was predicting that there were going to be false flag events, and everything came true each time. He's not getting credit for it. He's not asking for credit for it. Unfortunately for him, he really needs to come out in front of this. It's very likely that a lot of this is of the sanctions was put together because of him. Senator Cruz has been pushing for him to sanction German companies and everything around the pipeline. If he'd done that, he may not have been able to pull this coalition together if he'd been doing that since January, because Germany of its own accord shut the pipeline down. And maybe that was because behind the scenes he didn't, Biden didn't do this, didn't alienate him this whole time. I mean, there really has probably been some genius of diplomacy that Biden's never going to be able to talk about, because he doesn't go out and say, I've established sanctions, the biggest and best, most beautiful sanctions ever. He doesn't advertise it. Yeah. He didn't even really do it last night. But it had to have taken some real coordination around this to put some of this stuff together. There probably was diplomacy exercised in order to do it. And these sanctions are crippling the economy. The ruble dropped 30% on the first day. They were afraid to open up the markets because of the anticipated crash. I mean, it really is effective. And I don't think Putin thought that Biden would back down, because I think they started to believe their own hype of what right-wing television and media was telling them, that he was weak.
and that the allies were not going to cooperate, and that the domestic politics would be too difficult. But instead, like you said, I just want to point out the imperative key point that you mentioned. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline has been stopped, and the Nord Stream company, a Swiss company, has now declared itself insolvent and gotten rid of all of their employees. So it's not just that there's a temporary freeze. It's actually expanded to something much deeper and bigger that will actually end up probably being a transition in the history of the world when all is said and done. And I don't think that's hyperbole.
Last year, COVID-19 kept us apart. This year, we're finally together again. Tonight, 6 days ago, Russia's Vladimir Putin sought to shake the very foundations of the free world, thinking he could make it bend to his menacing ways. But he badly miscalculated. He thought he could roll into Ukraine and the world would roll over. Instead, he met with a wall of strength he never anticipated or imagined. He met the Ukrainian people. For more than 2 years, COVID has impacted every decision in our lives and the life of this nation. One way to fight inflation is to drive down wages and make Americans poorer. I think I have a better idea to fight inflation. Lower your costs, not your wages.
All right, last night, ordinarily, that probably would have been our first topic. But, when the possibility of World War III breaks out, we kind of prioritize that. Well, last night, it was the topic of the State of the Union speech, the first one for Biden. In many ways, it was just a typical State of the Union speech. But, there's always politics around it. And, of course, Ukraine was at the forefront. A lot of the congressional people who showed up in blue and white, the classic Ukraine clothing.
Yellow,
and
yellow.
Sorry, blue and
Yeah,
yellow.
it's okay.
Pardon me. Wrong. Yeah, definitely the wrong one. And so he. He talked about it, and he talked about how the West has pulled together and talked about the sanctions and talked about and pushed the sanctions package that right now is going through Congress. And it looked like for a long time it was in jeopardy. There's a little bit of wrangling about some details and some people trying to throw in extra stuff. And I think everybody's like saying, look, let's not mess with it. Let's get this through. But there are going to be additional sanctions and the like. And anyway, and there were some usual partisan politics and stuff, and we could talk a little bit about the antics of Boebert and Green, and treating it like it was a typical political rally when the State of the Union speech is supposed to be about respect for the presidency, even if you don't agree with the president.
Since you're bringing it up, you just want to tell people who don't know what was said and shout it out.
Sure, go ahead.
Yeah, so when Biden was talking about his support, President Biden was talking about his support for veterans, and I believe it was part of his 4-point plan that he said was a bipartisan plan to bring the country together. I think supporting the veterans was his fourth one, if I remember correctly. When he said, that's a pillar of what he wants to accomplish. And I didn't see it, but it was attributed to Boebert, Representative Boebert from Rifle, Colorado. She yelled out basically 14 soldiers came home draped in flags because of you. And she yelled it out in the joint chamber in front of the world. Right. And like you said, that's probably one of the low points of the evening for sure.
Yeah, and it's not something you did. The first time it had ever happened began with somebody kind of like her, Joe Walsh, about with Obama when he yelled "You lie," and it's just not something you do at the State of the Union speech. This is supposed to be, this is not a political rally. This is where you're supposed to respect the proceeding. But we've just got a new generation, a new era of politics where that kind of thing, where they just don't care. And there was also, a little bit of chanting between her and Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's 3 feet away from her. There just isn't that sense anymore, at least with that particular crowd. Now, there were Republicans who, said, yes, that was inappropriate, but they're not going to do anything about it. We're talking Marjorie Taylor Greene is in trouble for attending a white nationalist event, but are they going to do anything about it? No, it's just, this is where we're at right now. But other than that, it was pretty standard. Everybody was doing their thing. There were no real surprises. He did talk about his after he talked about the Ukraine initiative, and there was unity on that. Everybody stood up and clapped pretty much, and with it, and they had the Ukraine ambassador there. She was there and honored and the like. He talked about then inflation, and he talked about measures to fight inflation. And again, he brought up, I don't think he named it, but he brought up Build Back Better programs, hoping to bring it to entice Joe Manchin. Joe Manchin, it was kind of threw cold water on it initially, but today he's actually threw an olive branch. He's proposed, not formally proposed, but came up with an idea of let's keep the social programs out of it. He is concerned that if they revive the child tax credit, that's going to hurt inflation because, throwing money out there. But he wants to work on the tax reform, having rich people pay their taxes going back to that, he's willing to talk about the prescription drug price dropping, as that helping with the deficit. Apparently, he's been sold on that could help out with the deficit, and he's saying let's spend on environment. On the environmental stuff, which surprises me too, because he was resisting that before, rather than the social programs, because he sees that as inflationary, probably because it puts money in the hands of consumers, whereas spending on the environment maybe is more capital intensive and spread out over the time, and he wants it configured for 10 years, and all of that. It's not going to make a lot of the progressives happy, but it's something, and it's something that they could carry into the midterm. Anyway, that came out of the State of the Union speech, and that is something that is a renewal. It's the speech is kind of being given good reviews by the critics. Dave, what have you read?
Yeah, so just kind of looking big picture, I actually had a couple different versions of it going on last night. For the first time, I tried to listen to two coverages at once. It was a little weird, but I got a variety of opinions, and I think what I'm hearing and seeing in my own observations sort of combined, that it was, as you said, it was more or less what was expected. But I thought there was really interesting analysis, and I'll attribute this to Chris Hayes, who was on MSNBC. Take it, you can have your opinion about him or his network, but I think this is a really good point, is that Biden's his favorability ratings were over 50% when he first started, and now they're down to the high 30s. He's lost about 14% of the population. So that he's taken a hit. He's obviously losing popularity. Maybe it's his choices, maybe it's just the state of the world, but the bottom line is he has an opportunity to go back to that level of credibility, and that's the target audience for this speech. That's like the meat and potatoes of the country, the middle ground, and as some other commentators point out, this speech was more or less what was expected. And then this is my own little style assessment. His speechwriters, I think, did him a little bit of a disservice in the sense that it wasn't entirely clear to him as a speaker when he should take a break and pause, let people clap, or let the idea sink in. And maybe he was nervous. Maybe it's because he's a little bit older and a little bit less sharp as he used to be. People are very critical of that. I don't particularly think that's the reason. I think it was just sort of just how it played out. But his ideas really did merge together, and he would be talking about one thing, and then the next thing you know, he's about halfway through a sentence talking about the next idea. When it was almost I forget what the word is for it, but it was almost shocking to the mind for the flow of the comprehension of what he was actually even talking about. So there was a little bit of a disservice there in style and delivery. Which takes away from what it really did accomplish, I think, which was speak to the middle, try to get people to see that his approach. We're going to talk a little bit later about more of the specifics.
Yes.
but generally speaking, it was a way to highlight the policies that do and should appeal to the middle. And that's what I mentioned earlier in the segment. I'll be real quick about it, that he did say, I have a 4-point bipartisan plan. And it was a way to like separate from the Build Back Better stuff to some new material. And so it was beat the opioid epidemic and advance the cause of mental health. He pushed that, and he said supporting veterans. That's when Boebert yelled out. One commentator said she's a very sick woman to do that. I just think it's just hyper partisanship. But then, this is a key one. He said, end cancer as we know it. Everybody knows that these speeches, you're not going to get half of the things that you promise you're going to do or aspire to. But this, I think he could actually do but he's creating a new agency modeled after DARPA, which is the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. They invent many and cool things. They fund things sometimes decades before we even hear about them. He wants to do something called ARPA-H, so for health, I guess that's what that H stands for. And it's going to be like an incubator for cutting edge ideas and technology and research. And I think, technology is advanced. Machine learning has advanced now to the point where it actually is going to be a worthwhile investment. And then I think he just paid lip service after that to saving democracy as we know it, being optimistic, defining the nation by possibilities, the State of the Union is strong, et cetera, the regular boilerplate.
The message being, we're going to be okay. That was, the thing.
Exactly.
And reassuring. We'll see how it plays. We'll see how the polls move. Ironically, Rasmussen has them moving up. I don't know about the others. We'll see. Okay. Of course, there are always responses. The Republican always gives their official response. It was the governor of Colorado, a up-and-coming figure in the Republican Party. Interesting woman, not a Trumper.
Iowa.
Pardon me, Iowa. One of those rectangular states. I heard part of it. She's very articulate, and I would say not a Trumper. I think the Republicans are definitely looking to move away. She, was interesting, but. Not only that, the Progressive Caucus had their response to how do you say her name? I always have a hard time with it.
Rashida Tlaib.
Tlaib, that's it. Okay, and it had a list of a lot of the usual grievances. But during his speech, during the State of the Union speech, basically. As a setup for the midterms, I think President Biden wanted to undo the damage as the Democratic National Committee and a lot of their advisors and consultants had done. As the belief is that the defund the police really hurt Democrats in a lot of areas, and interestingly enough, it appears to have hurt them, at least if you believe the Pew statistics that have come out, the data, with people of color, particularly in Black and Latino areas. And if you're watching television, you can see a graphic that goes up. You can see that, if you take a look at it, it actually increased with, more in Black and Hispanic areas than white, and it's actually mostly a problem in those areas. And maybe that's because those are the communities where they tend to be more poorer communities, and those are the areas that need effective police. Who knows? I don't know, but but the data is pretty clear. So Biden basically came out and said, we want to fund the police. And there was people on both sides there came up and clapped. I don't think a lot of the Republicans were happy to actually be clapping, but they had to. But this was, I think, to defang the use of it by Republicans in a lot of the close races. The progressives, of course, in the the safe seats are, of course, free to keep saying it. And in her response, they want to clarify and get into the nuances of what defund means. But as we've discussed on this show, I think, when you right out the gate, you've got to explain that defund doesn't really mean defund. You've got a problem. It's a real difficult issue. But there are a lot of activists that don't want to give up on that that word because of the history of where it came from and the rest, and as to what it actually does mean. It means reallocate. And reallocate is a mouthful. Defund is simple, right? So it's just it's a controversial topic within to even discuss. But Biden grabbed it by the horns, and Tlaib, well, she objected to it, but not that much. It's just she basically, wanted to clarify it. She also, brought up, well, a number of other issues. Dave, you want to step in?
Yeah, sure. So I think I'll work backwards just because it's freshest in my brain after I from what your comments are. But yeah, so Michigan Representative Rashida Tlaib, she actually was. It looked like she was speaking through the Working Families Party Skype call or something like that. So she did represent that's who she was. She did state that that's what she was representing, was the Working Families Party, and that was the common thread throughout the response that she gave. But so on your points, you mentioned that the defund the police is being pointed to by analysts, consultants, commentators all across the spectrum on the to say like this is not helping and we really got to do something different here. She did make the case that what they're talking about is that policing ought to be accountable, and that end police brutality by ending qualified immunity. I think if they could figure out a way to say it that way, where we're going to support, we're going to fund, we all need safety, but the thing is that there's people acting with impunity in various police forces across the country. So you support the reform of the system in a way that allows for legal, predictable community involvement in the process, ... right? So I think there is a way to frame it, but more to the point on just the general response, I think she pointed out that Build Back Better didn't pass, that not one Republican voted for COVID relief package. COVID relief package lifted more children out of poverty than has ever been done, I think, in modern history. So the idea, as she went through this laundry list, it was always about referencing what we have in common as families. And so I'm not going to go down the whole list, but the idea is that if we frame our conversations about targeting policies to where they're going to help people in people's lives, I think it was effective. But each idea has so much to it. It's really hard in a small segment of time. But one of the things she pointed out, finally, I'll mention this before I hand back to you, is she said, look, let's put human dignity first. And when we prioritize $750 billion a year in defense spending, it's showing that we're voting with our dollars to prioritize one thing over the next. And that when we allow money to dominate policy, electoral outcomes, priorities, agendas, politicians are going to follow the money. So she sort of was trying to, I believe, that make the case that if we put our money where our mouth is, and we vote with our values, then we'll end up getting in a responsive legislature. So there's a lot more to it, but I think in general, one thing, actually, last thing on this, which is pretty interesting, this wasn't on the news. Like, I didn't see the response, her response on the news. I saw it on PBS. So I had to go find it. It wasn't.
It's not big news, no.
It's not big news to the networks because it's not red meat.
Yeah. Qualified immunity, attacking qualified immunity is a little bit easier because you can frame it pretty easily, because one of the aspects of qualified immunity is basically saying that, well, police shouldn't be held responsible for breaking laws all the time because they shouldn't be expected to know all the laws. Well, you talk to an average person about that, they might say, what? They're there to enforce the laws, and they're not expected to know the laws. You can attack that. And even some kind of conservative people will say, So that's a little bit easier than defund the police. And so it can be reframed. I mean, so you can do it, but I'm glad she's reframing that. We can have a discussion about qualified immunity. Most people don't know what it is, and when you start to explain it, there'll be a lot of questions up for it. And as somebody who has had cases of police misconduct dismissed because of qualified immunity, I mean, it's just
Sorry, I was just going to mention to you that people, I'm originally from New Jersey many moons ago, and I worked on police brutality cases, and my eyes were opened to what actually happens. I had no idea that was the way the world works in these cities, that legal services get so many calls every night about it. And then also that, conservatives, I grew up in an area that has a pretty good balance, and lots of my friends were conservatives. And when around, like I always say, at the football games and around Thanksgiving dinner tables, etc., there are a lot of people who have a natural sort of suspicion about why is the law enforcement so aggressive and so belligerent in so many cases to people that are in a position of weakness, whereas if you can afford a lawyer, you get a deferential treatment. So it does cross the political divide if you frame it correctly. And if you don't mind, I'm going to say one more thing. You also mentioned the Republican response. So just in general, for folks who didn't listen, I thought that it was framed in a way that where it was introduced as, hey, look, we've got massive, inflation, and we've got, the country's on the wrong track for lots of economic reasons. And, the Russians are being belligerent, and the United States is appearing to have weak leadership. And this is a flashback to back in, the Carter administration. And so it was this, that was how it was framed originally. And then as the governor went down the list, it was just a way of saying, look, we have different values and liberty is at risk. And, she stole a line, I think, or borrowed a line from Reagan, where she basically said people shouldn't have to wake up every morning what the government is going to do to your family and your business, which was Reagan's way of saying the things you should fear is hearing that I'm from the government, I'm here to help. So I think she tried to pick up that theme that lands well with the target audience.
And it flows. This topic flows from the last topic because it's going to be real interesting if this evolves. As we talked about, Biden did in his speech try to make a case that Build Back Better actually would mitigate inflation. And of course, he reminded everybody, he does remind everybody that 17 economists say so, award-winning economists say so. Manchin was sitting on the Republican side of the aisle, with him, sat right next to Romney, and is showing that he wants to work bipartisan and really doesn't want to, force something through with a reconciliation bill if he doesn't have to. And immediately afterwards, and this morning through cold water, I said, we need to move on. But apparently, he did later in the day come up with the possibility of, maybe we can look at a reconciliation bill here. And I don't want to call it Build Back Better. We need to rename it totally, and said because he really does want to reform the tax thing to restore some of the taxes going back. And it's a mistake to call this guy a total conservative. He's maybe in the pockets of a lot of people, and he's just really and for instance, he just help block, some bill pertaining to abortion. He's not pro-choice. He's definitely on that side of the fence on a lot of issues. But he definitely wants to to push taxes back on rich people for whatever reason. That might be a problem with Sinema. That came up with her, but he wants to do that in order for deficit reduction, and because he's interested in deficit reduction and inflation mitigation. And he says, you're not going to convince me that we're going to reduce inflation by spending, no matter what. I don't care what the economists say, but if we can offset it, come up with some, pay for some programming programs by restoring some of the budget, and matching deficit reduction with spending by restoring some of that revenue. And apparently he's been convinced since then, he didn't say this in the fall, that letting Medicare negotiate and reduce some of the drug prices would in fact reduce the deficit. Doing those two things, and then using the savings from that to half reduce deficit and do some spending, but he prefers that it go towards the environment, including mitigation of climate change, which I guess would lead towards alternative energy away from coal and natural gas. He's kind of contradicting my analysis that he's in the pockets of those interests. I don't know. I mean, it's interesting. Will the Progressive Caucus go along with this because they really want the social programs, but he's less likely to support those because, again, that puts the spending in the hands of consumers. And right now, inflation is the big deal, and trying to deal with inflation is going to be the big Achilles heel of the Democrats. It's probably the biggest reason that Biden's polling is in the tank. He's probably going to sell that. Dave.
Yeah, so you named this segment when we compared notes earlier that this is Build Back Better, sort of. So I thought actually this was the area of the speech where Biden made the point that we need to grow the economy and make the people's costs more affordable. And then he just rattled off a whole slew of ideas. And many of those ideas will, in fact, reduce the cost to the individual, to the family, also to the government. And then sort of, and it's a very complicated cause and effect, and, who knows exactly when. But the idea is if you took any one of these pieces, it could, in fact, help people. So, for example, childcare. The president proposed a 7% income cap on the amount of that families would pay for childcare. Right now, it costs $14,000 a year per child. So if after tax, that's your first $21,000 of income, and in a country where minimum wage, California might be 15, but elsewhere around the state it's 10 or less. The minimum wage is $21,000 a year. So the idea that if you cap childcare at a certain affordable level, then it has the added benefit of getting people back into the workforce, more people, more productivity, more taxes paid, and you could take each one of those points that he spelled out and make the case that they could grow the economy and make costs more affordable. It's just that this speech isn't really the place to do it. And when you just run on and on and on and list through them and talk through the clapping and stuff, like healthcare reform that includes long-term care, or pharmaceutical reform that includes negotiated pharmaceutical prices, Medicare negotiating prices, or the energy reform that he talked about, which was like the electric vehicle charging grid and reducing the cost of solar, making investments there. And, I'm not just going to rattle off the entire list, but enhanced pre-K. There's ways to add value, make people, help bridge the gap the United States might have with other countries in terms of the learning ability of our children. And lastly, tax reform. I think this was a big one. Like I've always say, and I think, this is a bipartisan critique of our current system. We now borrow 40 cents of every dollar we spend. Like the whole thing is unsustainable. But where do you even begin? Well, tax reform is a good way to say, well, you go where the money is. I mean, it's not rocket science. If you've got freeloading companies that, I think he said some huge percent, I forget the number now, but, a large percentage of Fortune 500 companies don't have to pay taxes, corporate taxes, right? Because the way the tax code is set up. But also, billionaires, when the vast majority of the $2 trillion tax cut during the Trump administration goes to the top 1%, that increases the deficit. So there's lots of little pieces together that Build Back Better would, in theory, if it was passed as a group, would help. But if we could look at them one by one, maybe we could start to get some bipartisan support, or at least full support within the president's own party.
Yeah, I don't know though. Manchin is not for social programs right now. The interesting thing that Manchin said in the fall, actually in the summer, is, hey, if you want these things, you need to get more people elected. I'm not the person who's going to do this. And so I have a feeling that his sales pitch, I mean, it's a real interesting sales pitch, is you want to get people elected, we need to pass something here and now. So you want to get people elected to have the child tax credit and revive all those types of things. We need to pass something that's going to make a difference. So let's do the tax reform and what I've proposed. That gives you something to run on here. You're probably your ratings are probably going to go up with this war. It's going to, interesting enough. That's probably what's going to happen. And you have a fighting chance to actually pick up votes in the Senate Senate, and maybe the House too, then you may not need my vote next year, right? So that's the way to do it, because the Progressive Caucus, the sale is going to have to be made to them, because they're not going to be happy that all of the social programs are going to be left out. But if they get the climate stuff and they just figure, okay, let's really fight to increase it, and we don't have Manchin and Sinema, if we get 3 more people in the Senate. I mean, it's just you got to be an optimist and just figure, okay, next year and do it. I mean, it's just, but unfortunately sometimes progressives, it's all like now we can't, we got to, as a matter of principle, not think pragmatically or ahead of time. I don't know what progressives will do there.
I mean, it's an interesting argument that we all have to pivot around Sinema and Manchin towards the middle until we can make the case to the full party. I would say Biden did rattle off. I know we're just limited time left on this topic, but he did mention paid family leave. I think nearly every advanced country on the OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, all the advanced countries have paid family leave. All advanced countries have universal health care coverage. So the progressives still have to make the case based on the merits. Sure. Countries like Singapore and Austria have social housing where it doesn't cost the government any money, but the housing is developed mixed incomes. So I think it's like the majority of the housing in the city of Vienna. So there are progressive ideas that can be articulated.
It's just a bad time with inflation at 7%, probably 8% by next month. So, all right, that takes us to our last topic.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
Well, there was a big election in Texas yesterday. A lot of interesting primaries resolved across the board. The big one at the top of the ticket, Abbott, who is current governor, will be the Republican contender. And Beto O'Rourke, he'll be running. I know that you've had misgivings about him being the candidate of the past, and would probably write him off if Abbott wasn't so unpopular, with at least a lot of people at the time, and hasn't really done almost everything he could to not get reelected. So we'll talk about it. I mean, I saw a meme there. He should be sent to Russia to take down the power grid or something. I can't remember what it was, but anyway. But a lot of other elections happened. I think, is it Cisneros the one who's gotten in trouble, had his office raided, and he's still running for office?
Yes.
I mean, I'll let you talk, Dave. You're actually more up on a lot of these. I'll let you kind of give a summary.
All right, cool. Well, so you hit the Republicans, and I'll leave it at that, other than to say that one last comment on the Republican gubernatorial primary was that Trump endorsed 33 candidates, and all 33 of those candidates. And so this was lower level, obviously, House and local races inclusive. And all 33 of those won. But I think it was a sort of a fait accompli, meaning like it was already a done deal, because these were people that were strongly supporting his way of looking at the world, and then they were popular in their own communities. But you kind of gave me the handover to the Democratic issues, and so the progressives had a chance to make a statement early in this primary season, but they were targeting 3 races, and in only 2 of them were they able to, sorry, in only one of those three were they able to avoid a runoff, because in Texas, if you don't get more than 50% of the vote in the primary, then there's a runoff. So we had Senators Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, as well as Representative AOC. They were down there campaigning. And there were lots of groups down there: Justice Democrats, Indivisible, Working Families Party, all heavily investing in the primaries. But it turns out that it wasn't. It's still the case that people really need to just focus on the economy and healthcare cost of families, because a lot of these farther-reaching progressive ideas were not enough to sway people away from the establishment Democratic candidates. So just generally speaking, O'Rourke got 90% of the primary vote statewide. He won nearly all 254 counties, which I think that's almost 80 counties more than last time when he ran for Senate against Cruz. So there's these three races. So I'll go through them pretty quickly, and I'll let you kind of say what your piece is here. So the 28th district was Cellular against Cisneros. That did not reach 50. It was like 48.4 to 46.9. In that instance, Cellular was that had the office invaded, in fact, in 2020, and really didn't have people thought didn't have a chance. So the fact that the progressive couldn't get 50% is actually not that great of a sign, but we'll see how she does. And then in the 35th district, Kikr did get a 62%, almost 61 and change. So did carry that district. That was one that, again.
Kikr, is that the socialist candidate in Austin, or am I confused?
Austin, Austin City Councilman, exactly. And so, a very safe district, obviously.
Yep.
And then 30th district, Crockett only got 48.5%, and so again needed a runoff. And she's a state lawmaker who actually brought the Democratic lawmakers to D.C. when Abbott was trying to push through the policy, the election policy, I believe it was, or maybe it was an abortion policy. I forgot when they left the state to not have to vote, so there was no quorum. So she's got statewide stature, and she even wasn't able to avoid a runoff. So that's not such a great sign for them. If she, she's very popular, and if she wasn't able to win, then maybe having all these progressives come to the state didn't help quite as much. The message isn't really sinking in as much as people expected.
Yeah, no, I mean, that is definitely the case. I also am looking forward to analysis as to how the voting suppression laws affected. We heard stories about how a lot of mail-in ballots were rejected. I don't know if they were able to get those fixed, and what the opportunities were for them to be able to get it in time. Looking forward to analysis of that. You suggested maybe 538 will be able to analyze that, but we'll be looking at that really closely to see. There were 1 million more Republican votes approximately than Democratic votes. We'll know if that was a factor. I think there were other factors too involving that. That doesn't necessarily mean that there'll be 1 million more Republican voters in the fall than Democratic voters. There's a lot that goes into those type of things.
So just to add to what those factors might be. So Abbott obviously is kind of like Texas in itself is sort of the poster child for Republican leadership at the state level. So Abbott has been doing his part to kind of keep those policies flowing that he believes his base is supportive of. So in the last year, he has put in new restrictions on abortion, eased gun laws, enacted new limits on how schools teach the history of racism. And then even just in the last few days and weeks, they put in place state agencies were classifying medical treatments commonly provided to transgender adolescents as child abuse. So these are all sort of red meat cultural issues that we could see come up on the national stage. And again, that does increase voter turnout. It gives them something passionate about their, cultural defense from I'm quite sure that all these progressives coming down to Texas to target a few races was able to create some degree of enthusiasm increase across statewide. That might explain partly why, like you said, over 800,000 people more voted, got energized and showed up for the primary.
I also think Abbott had a little bit more of opposition than Beto.
Yeah.
that might have drawn a little bit more interest. I think it was, but there wasn't much opposition. I didn't even know who ran against him. So, so it was just there. But you had concerns in terms of Beto because of the gun statement he made when he was, running for president, thinking he wouldn't have to worry about Texas anymore once he was, out of there. Anyway, we'll see how
just to put a fine point on it for folks who didn't hear me say this before. It was during the presidential speeches, and it was when there were still quite a few candidates, because he was one of the first ones to drop out. And that there is a movement based on, because of the school shootings. There are lots of people out there that want some degree of gun safety reforms. But there's a difference between that and vilifying guns, because gun owners, there's more, I think 200 plus million guns in a country of 330 million people. So it's a very popular thing to have. And so Beto actually got up there and was doing some grandstanding with verbosity, loud and charged, and he said, "We're coming for your," like he really. I'm not even going to say it out loud. I don't want to have myself ever to be recorded saying it. Like I would never say that. Like, because that's not what politicians should be doing. It's not what the government should be doing. Nobody should think that's a good idea, and I think that's probably disqualifying in the state of Texas.
And we'll see, although he is a really good candidate otherwise. I mean, he's very effective, gets out there and knows how to run a campaign. So we'll see. Democrats, they chose him. So overwhelmingly, I mean, we'll see. Also, just a side note, they set a record for LGBTQ. 20 candidates won in local and bigger races across the state. It is a state that's turning more blue. Although a lot of red people are, redder state type people are moving there, and we'll see. Also, I'll be curious to see how many of those Trump candidates actually win in the primaries. I don't know what, if those are close race areas, because that would make them actually less likely to win. So, I don't know. That's going to be interesting. Anyway, we will see, and we'll probably be reporting on a lot more primaries over the next few months. All right, Dave, what have you got for predictions?
So this one came to me last night while I was watching the State of the Union address, and I thought, like at the highest level possible, given all that's going on in the world, where are the parties? If you were taking the pulse of the party, like where is the Democratic Party? And I got the, sort of, it's probably California, and Governor Newsom probably best exemplifies that voice, and is it transcends a lot of the partisan divisions, or not partisan, a lot of the internal divisions between progressives and establishment Democrats. I think he'd make a great presidential candidate, and so then the question is, who is he going to run against? And then I thought, why, look at Texas. Like this is non-Trump in person, but with all of the sort of cultural coalescing policy initiatives and a track record of people, people say everybody's going to Texas, Republicans are leaving California and going to Texas. I think, why not just have that be the next presidential race? So that's kind of my prediction, is that's the direction of the parties. And we're probably going to see a Texas versus California standoff, competition for the next presidency.
All right. Well, my prediction, I don't usually make predictions about polling trends, but I do normally when a war breaks out, president's poll numbers go up just in support from that. But we're not at war. So that didn't happen. And also Biden, nobody can look strong in a situation like this, because what can he do? He's not going to send troops, right? But I do believe that, even as I mentioned earlier in the show, that even though he's not able to, he hasn't really sold what he's done, I do believe it's going to basically come through. And as this draws forward, it's going to be obvious that what he's done has basically held the coalition together and looks strong. And I am predicting that within the next, by the end of March, his polling will be above 45% average with a 538 average.
All right.
Yeah, so we will see. All right. Well, that takes us. We'll see, and hopefully we'll be here next week to do another show, and if everything hasn't gone totally wacko. But until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.